In this video, I want to give you an overview of the different types of ADU conversions and builds that you can take advantage of under Massachusetts' new Affordable Homes Act. If you're new to accessory dwelling units, often called ADUs, as of February 2025, homeowners across Massachusetts can now build an ADU by right on any residentially zoned property, including multifamily homes. That's a huge shift in our housing landscape. To give you an idea of how quickly this is catching on, there have already been more than 550 permit applications for ADUs statewide. Clearly, homeowners and investors are finding a lot of value here. I've been posting about ADUs for about a year now, and it's great to see that momentum building. If you want a deeper dive into the law itself, I have a couple of other popular videos on my channel that walk you through the details step by step. Now, I try to keep everything here as up to date as possible, but because individual towns can modify how they apply the ADU rules, it's not always easy to track every local variation. So if you ever hear of anything different happening in your city or town, drop it in the comments. That feedback helps me keep my content accurate and helps others in the community too. And before we jump in, just a quick note here. If you're interested in exploring an ADU on your property, my company, Your Mass ADU, can guide you through the process from start to finish. Head over to the website linked in the description to set up a free site visit. The first type of ADU we're going to be discussing today is the interior conversion, and it's probably the most common. This is where you take part of your existing house and separate it into its own self-contained unit. This is usually the most cost-effective ADU strategy because you're working within the structure that already exists. So the costs to convert are minimal compared to building something new. In a lot of homes, especially older ones, in-law apartments were already built years ago. In those cases, sometimes it's as simple as applying for the permit and just bringing the space up to code. So split level ranches are a classic example. Because they already have two distinct living levels with their own entrances, you can often create an ADU just by walling off some small areas to give each space privacy. Another good candidate is the space above an attached garage. In many homes, that functions almost as its own apartment anyways. So with some minor reconfiguration, it can become a fully legal ADU. This type of conversion can be especially attractive for new homeowners. Say you're stretching to afford your first home. Today's market with super high interest rates, a studio or one-bedroom apartment in the greater Boston area will usually rent for like $2,000 to $2,500 a month. That's a big chunk of income you can use to offset your mortgage. Now down the line, if you want to refinance to a lower rate, or you want to go back to living in the house as a true single family, you can always convert it back with minimal cost. Interior conversions also work well for empty nesters. If you've heard of the lock-in effect, that's a situation a lot of homeowners are facing right now. They bought or refinanced their home when mortgage rates were 3% or less. If they sell and buy something new today, their rate could be 2 or 3 times higher, which makes it tough to justify moving. So instead of selling, some homeowners are creating an ADU inside their existing house. In fact, some will actually move into the ADU themselves and rent out the larger portion of the home. It's a great strategy in this market because there's so much demand from families who want the single family experience but aren't ready or able to buy yet. Now, it's worth mentioning how interior conversions work in multifamily properties. So you can add an ADU inside a 2 or 3 family, but you need to be aware of the state fire code. In Massachusetts, once you create 3 or more dwelling units inside a structure, you trigger the requirement for a full sprinkler system under the Mass State Building Code. So even if a zoning considers it like a 2-family plus ADU, fire safety treats it as a 3-unit building and sprinklers are required, unfortunately. That can add anywhere from $30,000 to $50,000 to a project. You know, it's something we've seen come up in real projects, and it's important to just know about it before you start planning and permitting. One other drawback to keep in mind is the lifestyle. With an interior ADU, you're going to have a tenant sharing your space. That means you're stepping into the role of landlord, which isn't for everyone. But from my own experience doing this for the past 10 years or so, it's very manageable if you screen your tenants well. Just remember that compared to a detached ADU, your tenant will be in closer quarters, so you just want to be comfortable with that arrangement. So the cost for interior conversions, it's kind of hard to put even an average number on because some of them can range from just getting it permitted, like if you already have your own existing in-law apartment ready to go, and others could be as high as 6 figures for a renovation if you were doing like electrical, plumbing, structural, things like that. So because of that, it's really hard to put any sort of average number on these conversions, and it really just has to be done on sort of a site-by-site basis. Another ADU conversion option is the exterior conversion. Now this is when you take an already existing detached structure on your property. Most commonly you'll see this as like a freestanding garage, and you convert it into a legal accessory dwelling unit. For investors, this may be the single best type of conversion. So a lot of multifamilies across Greater Boston still have old garages or carriage houses sitting in the back, often underutilized or in poor shape. Now, converting that space into a rental unit is usually a much higher and better use of that property. One big advantage here is how the Massachusetts state law is written. Under the Affordable Homes Act, setback requirements don't apply to existing non-conforming structures. So that means if your detached garage was already sitting too close to a lot line, you can still convert it into an ADU without having to meet today's zoning setbacks. Now, that's a huge win for these older urban properties where the garage is often right on the property line. Now, a question that comes up a lot is fire code and sprinklers, like we were talking about with interior. It still can apply to exterior conversions. So with interior conversions, inside a multifamily, you almost always trigger that sprinkler requirement because you're increasing the unit count. But with detached ADUs, the situation is a little different because the ADU is not part of the main building envelope. The sprinkler requirement generally doesn't apply under the Mass State Building Code. A detached garage conversion is its own structure, so it doesn't push the main building into that category. That said, there are still gray areas, like some municipalities interpret the code differently, like especially if the new ADU or the exterior conversion sits very close to the primary building. In those cases, local building officials may argue for sprinklers or additional fire separation, even if the state code doesn't strictly require it. So it's something to confirm in your permitting process, but based on the projects we're seeing permitted so far, most detached conversions are moving forward without sprinklers. Now, in terms of cost, these projects are typically in the $250,000 to $300,000 range. And if you're in highly desirable areas close to Boston, think like Somerville, Cambridge, Dorchester, a standalone 2-bedroom, call it 900 square foot ADU, easily rent for like $3,000 a month or more. That puts the return on investment in the 10 to 15% range, which is very hard to replicate with other real estate projects in today's market. The investment case gets even stronger on multifamily properties. If you convert a detached garage on a 2-family into an ADU, you now have 3 legal rental units. So from an appraiser's perspective, the property is no longer just a 2-family, it's competing with 3-family comps. And in Greater Boston, that difference in price per unit is significant. In fact, you could reasonably expect the value of the property to increase by at least the per unit value of local 3-family sales, giving you strong equity lift in addition to that additional rental income. Personally, I think the upside might be even higher. A detached ADU is essentially its own standalone single-family home in the eyes of renters and in many cases, buyers. That separation gives it more privacy and functionality than simply adding another floor inside a multifamily. Now, appraisers haven't had enough comps to fully capture that premium yet, but I do think once we start seeing more sales of properties with detached ADUs, the value is going to exceed what traditional multifamily comps suggest. So while interior conversions are the most cost-effective way to create an ADU, exterior conversions might be the most powerful from an investment standpoint, considering cash flow and that additional equity add you get. The last major ADU option is a new build. We're talking ground up construction without relying on an existing structure. This is the most expensive way to add an ADU, but it gives you the most flexibility. With a new build, you can design the layout, size, placement exactly the way you want, instead of being constrained by the footprint of a garage or basement. Because this is full construction, it also tends to be the longest timeline from design to permits to actual building. You're usually looking at like 6 to 9 months, and sometimes longer depending on the complexity of the project and how quickly your municipality processes permits. Unlike garage conversions, where setback rules don't apply to existing non-conforming structures, new builds are treated like any other new construction. That means local setback requirements, lot coverage limits will apply, and you need to make sure your ADU fits into whatever zoning parameters your town requires. On top of zoning, new construction in Massachusetts also needs to meet the latest state energy standards. As of 2023, the state adopted an updated stretch energy code and introduced the specialized energy code for towns that opted in. These require new residential units to be highly energy efficient with standards for insulation, windows, HVAC, and in some cases even requiring all electric construction. For example, depending on the town, you may need to include heat pumps for heating and cooling, energy recovery ventilation, solar-ready roofs, things like that. Now, it's worth confirming which version of the code your city or town has adopted, since compliance can add both upfront cost and long-term savings. In terms of cost, we're seeing new builds in the range of $300,000 to $400,000, depending heavily on site work, excavation, grading, utility hookups, and foundation work can quickly push that number higher or lower depending on the lot. One other thing to keep in mind here is that lenders and appraisers are still figuring out how to value ADUs. With a brand new build, the quality of construction can really set your property apart. In high demand markets like Somerville, Arlington, Brookline, a brand new 1 to 2 bedroom ADU could easily command $3,000 or more per month in rent, while also significantly increasing the overall property value. So to summarize, new builds are the most expensive and time-consuming way to add an ADU, but they offer maximum design flexibility, modern code compliance, and the potential for the highest rental rates and property value appreciation. Now, another option that's in the new build category here, it's starting to gain a lot more traction in Massachusetts, is the modular ADU, sometimes called a prefabricated ADU. So these have been popular in parts of the country like California and Oregon for years, and we're finally seeing them roll out in Massachusetts as zoning and state law catch up. The main appeal of modular construction is cost and speed. Because the units are built in a factory under controlled conditions, construction costs are lower, and the on-site build time is drastically shorter. So for example, a 2-bedroom modular ADU with site work included can run around $300,000, while smaller 1-bedroom or studio models can be closer to the $250,000 range. Many modular ADUs also come delivered with fixtures, finishes, even appliances included. So it really can be a turnkey product once it's set in place. Now, in terms of timeline, modular ADUs can sometimes be completed in half the time of traditional stick-built projects. While a site is being prepped, foundation poured, utilities run, things like that, the ADU itself is being assembled in the factory. Now, once it's delivered, it can be craned into place and connected, which shaves off months from the total project. Another benefit is that these units are pre-approved to Mass State Building Code, and much of the inspection and sign-off process is handled in the factory. That tends to make the permitting process simpler, although you'll still need local zoning and site inspections for foundation and utility connections, and you'll most likely have to get signed off by local inspectors for everything else. Now, there are, however, some challenges with modular ADUs in Massachusetts. The first is lot size. So most modular ADUs are just single story. So they require a larger footprint than like a 2-story stick-built design. That makes it harder to place them on smaller, dense urban lots where yard space is limited. The second challenge is site work. If your lot is sloped, or if there's a ledge, or if utilities need to be trenched a long distance, the cost of saving of modular can disappear quickly. Access is another issue. You'll need enough space for a crane or large truck to deliver and set the unit, which isn't always possible in older neighborhoods with narrower streets. Another factor in Massachusetts is availability. So while modular ADUs are just starting to enter the market here, there aren't many local manufacturers yet. Most units are still being shipped in from out of state, which adds transportation costs and sometimes delays. Now, over the next few years, as more regional builders ramp up production, we should see costs come down and options expand. That said, for the right lot, modular ADUs can be a fantastic solution. You're getting high quality, factory built unit delivered quickly at a lower price point than most new builds. And as demand for ADUs grows under the Affordable Homes Act, modular may end up being one of the most scalable ways for mass homeowners and investors to add units. If you think a modular unit might be a good fit for your property, I work closely with a very reputable modular builder, so feel free to reach out for more info on that. Now, if you've made it this far in the video, you're clearly into ADUs, so if you're looking for even more info, here are a couple of my other popular videos. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time.